Hello and welcome. UVA Speaks is a podcast of Lifetime Learning, a division of the Office of Engagement at the University of Virginia. Lifetime Learning brings the knowledge and expertise of UVA's faculty to the university's alumni, friends, and families. My name is Susan Lynch, and I am the Associate Director of Lifetime Learning at the University of Virginia's Office of Engagement. This podcast features Melanie Prengler, an Assistant Professor of Business Administration at the University of Virginia's Darden School of Business. At Darden, Professor Prengler teaches the class contemporary issues in human resources in the leadership and organizations area. She studies how employees in remote work arrangements create a sense of workplace out of non-work spaces. In this podcast, Professor Prengler will talk with us about her research on remote work and digital nomads. So thank you, Professor, for speaking with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. So thank you. So first, can you share a bit about the history and trends of remote work and how the COVID pandemic has impacted remote work? And then really how many people in the country are working remotely?
Sure. So pre-industrial revolution, working from home was actually the norm. Craftsmen tended to live above their workshops. And if you think about the famous writers from a long time ago that we all learned about in high school, they were writing at home writing desks. And even the lords and ladies of old worked from home, so to speak, if you consider the historical significance of hosting state dinners or picnics from their homes. And it really wasn't until recently, with the Industrial Revolution, that it became a norm to work outside the home. That's really a relatively new idea in the history of people working. And as an example, in 1990, the year before I was born, only 2.7% of workers reported working from home at all. So it's pretty unusual. And today, 14% of people work remotely from home full-time and 41% are remote at least part-time. So this represents a huge shift. There was already pre-pandemic a trend towards increased remote work, but COVID-19 obviously accelerated that. I think the holdup before was that so much of the organizational infrastructure, so where we have meetings, how we communicate, what our rhythms are like, what supervisors expect in terms of face time with their employees and vice versa, was centered around assuming that people were co-located, meaning they were working in the location where all their colleagues were working, coworkers were working. So they didn't have Zoom, they didn't have remote work policies, employees weren't ready to work from home, they didn't have home offices, their lives weren't adjusted to having remote work with families or negotiating pickup if you're working in the mornings, just working from home in the mornings rather. So the world just really wasn't built for it. And then post-COVID, organizations, or in the midst of COVID, organizations were really obligated to adjust, to make updates, to figure out ways to facilitate communication between employees if they were working remotely, to figure out ways to evaluate performance without having to use FaceTime as a heuristic. So organizations have really adjusted, and I think that's in part why almost half of workers are working remotely full time.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, the pandemic wasn't a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Given that it spanned a couple of years, organizations really and companies really needed to find a way to make it work. So
yes, and now I think there's an expectation for a lot of employees that they will be able to work remotely. So I know a lot of tech companies in particular have shifted to being fully remote, which in part has been helpful because there's less overhead because you're not having to pay for large offices. But it really has become an expectation in some industries that you will be allowed to work from wherever you want to work.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you explain what digital nomads are and the trends in how many workers are considered nomads?
Yes, so digital nomads are people who work full-time while traveling full-time. This like prototype that people tend to have in mind is somebody who is backpacking and working while being a programmer. So they don't really have a set apartment. They don't have a lease anywhere. Maybe they're staying at different B&Bs or staying at different hostels, and they're sustaining their work by working as a programmer. Other people think about van lifers, so people who have a van and travel around the country. and they are sustaining their work because they are maybe doing some kind of remote management or doing some kind of copy editing, or they're making money from sponsored content on social media. But there's no one consistent workplace that they're going to in any of these scenarios. It really is just kind of anchored to their laptop, which is the digital nomads. And the trends in this are pretty surprising. So I would have thought digital nomads before I started doing this research were one in a million, really. I just this sounds like such an unusual and cool work arrangement. I just really didn't think it would be that possible to do. And I started studying this pre-pandemic, so that was in part also why I had that impression. And the trends in remote workers are growing exponentially. So about 20% of workers in America identify as digital nomads today, and this is up from 7% pre-pandemic. So the definitions that people have of digital nomad might be a lot more generous in that estimate. A 1 in 5 workers seems like a pretty high number. But even if it's an overestimate, even if it's over by double, that's still a huge amount of workers are now identifying as digital nomads.
Yeah, and it's important for us to really know that. I mean, I watch some YouTube channels and see mainly van lifers and see what you're talking about in that regard. And so, yeah, I thought it would have been a smaller number, but yeah, the technology is there, and people are interested in doing that. So that's interesting.
Yes, and I think partly that's I think part of the reason why so many people are able to identify as digital nomads is that even if they're not traveling full time, I think there's still this kind of like digital nomad identity that people identify with. So if they're working from home, but they're going back and forth between their home office and their kitchen table and a coffee shop and a co-working space, and it kind of changes day to day or even within the same day, I think people can feel like a digital nomad, even if they don't technically adhere to the definition. So I think that's in part why people are saying, like, yeah, well, I kind of am a digital nomad.
Yeah, yeah, very good. Thank you. So, what does it mean to have a sense of workplace? Why is that important? And how do remote workers have a sense of workplace, if at all?
So I think to best answer this question, it's helpful to think about a common complaint that we might have heard or said at the beginning of the pandemic, as so many people were switching to remote work. So if we can imagine someone sitting at their living room or spare bedroom or kitchen table saying, like, I just don't feel like I'm at work. That feeling of being at work is really what we mean when we talk about a sense of workplace. The technical definition is the work related meaning and attachment that I have to a particular location. And this is important because when we feel like we're at work, it's easier to step into our worker persona. It's easier to concentrate. The space is conducive to our work, and that helps us be more engaged. So it's important. And the challenge for digital nomads is that one of the strongest predictors of a sense of place, a sense of workplace, is how long you've been in that location. So 20 years being in a location, you're going to feel a lot more a deeper sense of workplace than you would if you had only been there for 2 years. But for digital nomads who are changing locations every few days, sometimes establishing a sense of workplace can be really challenging. The research shows that there are a few ways that they do this. First, they can bring objects with them from place to place that help them have a sense of familiarity, even in new settings. So, for example, one of the folks that I studied said she has a few of these that she brings with her. She brings a yoga mat with her, and she said it's kind of her the same yoga mat. She's had it for years. It's kind of this very special connection with her. Helps her feel like she's at home, even if she's in a new spot. She'll listen to the Harry Potter audiobooks. She said she listened to them like hundreds of times probably at this point, and she said it's just so familiar that she can listen to it in a new place and feel just very at home immediately. And similarly, like a candle, she has a homesick candle, which is a brand that makes candles that kind of smell like a particular state. And she would bring her home state candle with her, and she would just light it and feel right away like, okay, I'm in my familiar place. And that helped her really feel like she could get work going right away. The same applies to routines. So even if it's not objects, having a similar routine. So there is somebody who has kind of like a formula for how he arranges his work related objects in front of him when he sets up. So he's like, I have my laptop in a particular place, my coffee in a particular place, my phone in a particular place, and it's kind of arranged in my desk the same way. So the desk surface might be changing, but my work things are consistent across locations. Um, and then one of the last really important things is just predictable infrastructure, like having Wi-Fi and having a comfortable seat. That can really help people feel right away like they can just log on and then they're at work, so to speak.
Great. So this question sort of comes off of that, I think. So what advice do you have for people who are considering becoming digital nomads? And what about for people who work remotely?
Yeah. So if you're considering becoming a digital nomad, my guess is you have quite a bit of wanderlust. So I would consider how much wanderlust you have and calibrate your approach to travel and remote work accordingly. So my research shows that for people who have this really extremely high wanderlust, even by digital nomad standards, you're going to want to iterate back and forth between freedom and familiarity. So going to a new place, getting settled in, and then as soon as you feel settled in, you're going to want to change immediately. Those folks tend to change location pretty frequently, those like every 3 days or maybe 3 weeks, folks that I was mentioning earlier. So the advice I would have for you is like to be comfortable with changing locations frequently and to realize that that is a perfectly acceptable solution to balancing the need for structure and also the need for freedom. So when things start to feel familiar, you can get into a new place and also you can get plugged in and feel that bit of routine really easily. For folks who have a bit more moderate wanderlust by digital nomad standards, you can travel a little bit slower. Those folks tend to change locations every 3 months, 6 months, even from year to year. That's where artifacts of familiarity can be especially helpful. So bringing those things that feel like home when you're even in a new place can help you feel like very settled. And it's also important for those folks to still find little ways to feel a sense of freedom, even if they're 3 months or 6 months or 9 months into being in one location. So for those folks, that might look like looking at plane tickets, planning their next spot. It helps them feel like they can get out if they want to.
Okay, and for those of us who are working remotely, I work in the Office of Engagement under
Mhm.
the advancement, and we are almost totally remote. Um, and the sort of thought is, work where you work best. Once a month, we all come together, and which we did yesterday. The building was full here this morning, and not so much. But I find that we are all, our measurements are just the same. Are the same. We're doing the work. We're doing it well, and I think it's working for all of us, and it certainly has over many years. So for all of us who are working, more steadily remotely, is there any other things that you would suggest for us?
Yeah, I think a lot of the advice for digital nomads still applies to remote workers. So if you are the kind of person who's like, I really would rather have like the same home office. I want to have my routine. I want to have that kind of familiarity and know exactly what I'm getting into. That would be what I would consider maybe low wanderlust. Then having a consistent home setup that's conducive to work is great. Um, there might be other folks, like you said, I love the philosophy that y'all have that you kind of work from where you work best. That might change for other folks from day to day. It might be today, I just feel like being in a coffee shop. Today, I feel like working from my bed. Today, I feel like working from a park or whatever it is. And establishing routines and having some kind of setup or touch point for when you get to the park or the coffee shop or bed or whatever to help you feel like, yes, this is work. This is my workplace, whether that's setting up your laptop in a particular arrangement or maybe you have headphones that you bring with you place to place that just kind of make you feel like you're in work mode, different things like that that can help you feel like this is work, even if I'm not at work technically.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that it's also done is that we have new employees that live all over the country now. And so
Mhm.
they come in a couple of times a year, and for those face-to-face interactions, and those are planned and sort of certain things happen at those times. But I think you can get sort of more motivated and perhaps people that fit into those roles best if you're
Mhm.
able to look beyond um, just the area around Charlottesville, Virginia. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So, and finally, I understand you conduct a qualitative research. And what's one of the most interesting stories from your research that you'd like to share?
Yes, so there's really two that always come to mind. So the first is a story about what's called a border run. So for folks who are in countries where there's a visa limitation, so say you can be there for 3 months, and that's the kind of travel visa, they'll go on border runs where they'll travel to the border of the country, cross over for a night, and then when they come back, their visa resets. Um, that can be much easier said than done, depending on the infrastructure of the country, depending on how far you are from the border, depending on how cumbersome it is to go back and forth over the border. So there was someone I was talking to who just through a ton of back and forth, through cars breaking down, through roads being washed out, through the border guards not knowing the same rules in one location as the last place that he did the border run, ended up spending a full week unable to work because he was just traveling. And there was, of course, no Wi-Fi available for any of this and no hotspot at the time. And so I think like that story stands out to me, one, because it's just, I can just place myself in his shoes and I just feel the annoyance and frustration of it for him so much. But also, I think because this has such an important implication for managers who are managing employees who are working remotely and particularly who are digital nomads, having some kind of assistance for infrastructure type challenges like this can be so helpful. I think this particular employee felt like he told his boss, like, hey, like, I'm so sorry, like, I'm basically kind of ended up needing to take like a week off. I'll keep you updated, but like, I just don't know what's going on. And I think at the time, remote work wasn't really a thing. And I think the boss was very annoyed with him. And it would be helpful if companies want to welcome employees who are digital nomads, who have this desire to travel, having something to help them figure out the visa situation easier, to figure out infrastructure easier can be helpful, and it can help that employee get back to work more quickly.
Mhm.
One of the other stories that stands out, so a lot of the digital nomads are kind of like, would probably describe themselves as free spirits. Um, and one of the digital nomads I talked to, he had been nomadic for over 20 years. He was one of the first. And he was talking about how he's like, it seems antithetical to my personality, but everywhere I go, I have to make sure that there's a Starbucks. He's like, you wouldn't think that this kind of corporate coffee shop would be something that I really love, but he's like, it's great because it's the same absolutely everywhere around the world. And there's Starbucks is pretty much in every country that I go to. So he was like, I kind of know the table that I want to sit at. I order the same thing every time. I know that they're going to have good Wi-Fi, and that's really his office. So every time he works, he's working from a Starbucks.
Starbucks needs to know about him. So
Yeah, exactly.
great, great. So how do you find these folks that that you're able to speak
Yeah.
to about your research?
Most of the folks that I found initially, I found just by reaching out to them on their social media. So a lot of digital nomads document their travels for YouTube or for Instagram or just on like blog pages, websites. And so I would reach out to them by direct messaging them or by filling out a contact form on their website. And after I got my foot in the door with those initial folks, the network tends to be pretty strong. And so they would recommend me to other folks. And it just kind of went from there.
Great, great. Well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Professor Prengler, for sharing all of this information. As I said, I'm a remote worker, and it's interesting to hear about the research that you're doing and, the increasing percentage of those of us that are in the same boat. And as you said, more and more employees are wanting this kind of flexibility. And so thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise with UVA's alumni, friends, and families.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Great. And thank you so much to everybody for listening. For upcoming podcasts and other lifetime learning programming, recordings, and blogs, please visit our website at engagement.virginia.edu/learn. You can also find our podcasts on the Virginia Audio Collective, which is a network of UVA podcasts hosted by WTJU Radio and can be found at virginiaaudio.org. So thanks again, and we look forward to you taking part in future lifetime learning programs.